Hi, everybody. I'm happy to get a chance to talk to everyone today. I hope, first and foremost, everybody and their families are safe and healthy in such an unusual time, and wish we were all doing this in person, but hopefully sometime soon.
Hey, Paul.
Go ahead,
I was wondering if you could comment on a report yesterday. We're always hearing rumors about Odell Beckham Jr. and his future here in Cleveland. There was a report that the Browns have been talking to the Vikings about a potential trade. Could you just comment on that, please?
Sure. I guess in short, I'll just say it was completely false. It's frustrating a little bit. Obviously, I think it's pretty clear that we're trying to build at this point. We've done an awful lot in free agency. We're excited about what we have a chance to do in the draft, and we're really building around a core of players that we think have a chance to be a championship caliber core. And the idea that we would take away from that core, at this moment just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and really not something that we're exploring at all. So, it's completely false.
Paul, can you take us to next Thursday and describe your setup for us? How many phones, how many computers, how many screens when the draft gets going?
Well, my home office is definitely enhanced from what it was previously. I think Brandon Covert and his team of IT folks at the Browns have done an unbelievable job of setting all of us up to make sure that we're functioning. I do have an official draft phone here in my office. I have multiple screens. I have some backup generator and backup internet just in case things go down. So I think we'll be in really good shape. And I think my setup is going to mirror what probably 8 or 9 of us in the organization have.
Hey, Paul, could you elaborate on something? At the intro press conference of the Fantasy, in your sidebar interview, you talked about how your very first draft on the job, you didn't know a lot about the NFL, and here we are 4 years later, and I'm wondering if you could expound on what you know now about the NFL that you didn't know then when it comes to this particular event.
Oh, sure. I think, probably not unlike anybody else in scouting. You just with each passing year, you just gain a larger and larger library of players in your head. You can always go back and try to learn from players that came before you, but it's a lot different when you do all the work on an entire draft class, and then you learn, from their outcomes, ultimately. So I think that's been, it's been a great learning experience for me. I feel a lot more comfortable today than I did 4 years ago, just in terms of my knowledge of players, what it is I'm looking for, what are the warning signs of certain players, that type of thing. But I also know this: I'll be a lot better next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So I think it's part of the reason it's so valuable to have some people around who've been through a lot of these. I mean, the library of players that Ryan Grigson has in his head and that he's experienced and that he's been able to share with us during draft meetings has been invaluable. And the more and more we're around that, I think it just accelerates everybody's learning.
Hey, Paul, how difficult has this virtual draft transition been for your specific responsibilities? And what are some of the obstacles that you kind of had to go through these last couple of weeks?
I'll be honest. Peter and I were joking. I probably a little more experience working from home than most. At least that's what people seem to think. But look, it really hasn't been too bad at all. And I think if you look at certainly the grand scheme of things of what people are dealing with in the world, what we've had to deal with is trivial. Trying to make sure we get set up and have virtual meetings as opposed to doing it face to face, again, pales in comparison to what a lot of real people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis right now. So I don't think any of us has seen it as a really big deal. It's just been a challenge to overcome, but we're been completely focused on the players, just like we always are. And I just don't think it'll be materially different. My biggest disappointment, I think, for this year, because of the circumstance, is that we can't all be together to really enjoy it. It's been a incredibly collaborative exercise to date, and I think it's going to be incredibly collaborative experience next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I think it ultimately would be fantastic if we could all experience that together in the same room and in the same building with all of our coaches, with all of our scouts, with all of our football personnel. And unfortunately, we won't be able to do that piece of it. And I think that's a shame. But in terms of picking players and the execution of our plan, I feel great about where we are, and don't think that the setup is going to hinder us in any way, whatsoever.
Paul, how do you feel about what you've been able to do in free agency, sort of executing your plan and that kind of stuff?
Excellent. We really felt great about what we were able to do in March with free agency. We had a very specific plan, I think, both offensively and defensively. Thought, the coaches worked really, really well with personnel to try to carry that off. And then I thought Andrew Berry just did an outstanding job of executing on the plan. We obviously went after some target guys early with the offense. We decided we'd be a little bit more patient with the defense and fill in a lot of the depth that we felt like we needed. And again, I think we executed it really well, and AB really ought to be commended. He was juggling an awful lot. I don't think we expected all of it to happen as quickly as it did. We knew that the big deals, as always, tend to happen really fast, so we were prepared for those. But in terms of making the deals we were able to make on the defense, I think it's a real credit to Andrew that those got done as quickly as they did. I think under normal circumstances, those may have played out over the course of 2 or 3 weeks and not 5 or 6 days. But
Paul, just to follow up on that. I'm sorry, just to follow up on that. Why the emphasis on maybe the offense first?
Oh, I think it's just what the class presented to us.
Okay.
We were looking at. I think if a couple of players had been available on the defense in key positions and they fit all of our criteria, then we would have done the same on defense. But in this particular year, a couple of them that really sort of checked all the boxes for us happened to be offensive players.
Hey, Paul, with the potential for trades next Thursday and with everybody
also
spread out,
I would say one last comment on that is, the other thing is, we've talked a lot about being a quarterback-centric, organization. And, the first 2 big signings, I think, certainly point to doing whatever we can to support the quarterback. So I think that was, certainly another reason why it ended up working. But it did so happen that those types of guys were available, in this class.
Paul, with the potential for trades next Thursday and the front office spread out in different locations and that, how far along are you in the process of, maybe placing value on picks that are behind the Browns? And just what does that process entail from your standpoint?
Yeah, our guys have done a tremendous job over the years of getting a handle on the market when it comes to trading picks. So I think we feel very comfortable there. What'll be different, this year is just the actual logistics of talking that through, or if multiple teams are calling us, at a particular spot, and we're in different, we're on the phone, or different people from the Browns are on the phone, but in different locations, and then have to communicate it all to the group. It'll just go a little slower than it would if we were all in the same room. But I think we have plenty of time. Given the structure of the draft and the different rounds, I think we'll have plenty of time to actually carry out anything that we actually want to do.
Hey, Paul, what is your reason? Go ahead, Tony. Go ahead, Tony.
You said in the past that as far as your role in the draft, you are not going to be picking players. You got guys to do that for you. When it comes to giving the green light on a trade, does it need your approval, or can Andrew Berry execute a trade on simply his authority?
Oh no, I like I said, I think everything that we've done to date and the way we operate is just try to be as collaborative as possible. I don't think this is about anybody having, veto power over anyone else. We know that in this environment, AB has to make the final call. Just like on Sundays in the fall, Kevin has to make the final call. We often talk about, we've all got a headset on, but, someone's got to have the main headset where they make the call. And that's going to change depending on the type of decision or even the time of year. But I think it's pretty clear next week that, that AB's got that control headset on.
Paul, what is your research, though, in terms of, you have several guys in the draft are primarily right tackle, you need a left tackle. What is your research, though, your feelings about, like a guy from Alabama that's like primarily right tackle or somebody else going over the left?
Yeah, I probably won't share a whole lot of that analysis because of some of the proprietary work that's involved, but I do think there are certainly examples historically of guys who have made transitions from one side to the other. But I think we make those decisions on sort of an individualized basis. So I wouldn't make any sweeping comments as to whether or not we think, that just universally someone can move from one side to the other or they can't. It really is a case by case basis, and it's something we've talked about. It's something we've, Bill Callahan's weighed in on it for us, and scouts have talked about extensively, and I think we feel good about where we are in those discussions on each guy, but I'm not going to comment on any of the individual guys.
Well, as far as like you said, the research you have found some guys that used to be right tackles that gone over the left, I guess, but that seems like the primarily harder one allegedly.
Yeah, it wouldn't be unprecedented. I'll say that.
Okay.
Paul, as you look at left tackle, how do you weigh, the possibility of, going out and acquiring a proven veteran versus, bringing in a young guy in the draft on a rookie contract?
Sure. Yeah, no, there's definitely a balance between your short-term and long-term, expectations. In the short term, even when you take great players in the draft, you have to expect that it's going to take a little time for them to get their sea legs, at the NFL level. Again, someone asked at the very beginning about some of my learnings from my first draft till now. I mean, I can look back at that 2016 tackle class, and, there's some really, really good players right now after 4 years in the NFL. They didn't necessarily play at that level in year one. So I think we have to expect that, if you take any young player, regardless of position, but certainly at the tackle position, that they're not going to just be an all-pro right away. You have the rare case, you have the Joe Thomases of the world, and I think that's what we're all shooting for. But I think those are extremely unusual. And I think you have to expect that there are going to be some growing pains for any young player. At the same time, those players may have really, really high potential. And so going through those growing pains is quite worth it, because you look up after 2, 3, 4 years and you do have that perennial all-pro playing at a key position. So, but it certainly is something that we have to weigh, not just at that position, but I think across the roster as we look at some of these players that we have a chance to add during the draft. But I do think you can run into problems when you go into the draft with the idea that you're solving needs for that season. I think sometimes that can be a mistake.
Hey, Paul, obviously we've seen Browns trade down from the top 10 several times over the years. Would you say organizationally the philosophy is it's better to trade down than to trade up, just because having the more picks is more valuable, and we can see that again this year?
I'm sorry, you broke up there just for a little bit. I got that the beginning of the question, but then I lost it a little after that.
I mean, would you just say that you're more inclined philosophically to trade down than trade up, and that could be the case again this year, given your situation at number 10?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'd say this: we're very open-minded in general. We have moved down in the past. We've also moved up in the past. So I wouldn't really put anything past us. I think we do have the philosophy that more picks is better. When you just have more draws, you have a better chance of hitting on more guys. I think we believe in that, generally, but that doesn't mean we'll just always be trading back, as a result. But I think we're pretty flexible on that front, and if there's an opportunity that we think makes sense to go in either direction, I think we'd be open to pursuing it.
And Paul,
you've been surprised.
Obviously, there are a lot of unknowns at this moment, but to be blunt about it, what's your appetite for trading down from 10?
Oh, I think it's impossible to say right now. I'll have a better idea, next Thursday night after the first handful of picks are off the board, probably. Look, we think there's going to be a very good player there for us at 10, a very good player. It could be, and I don't have one player in my mind right now. There are more than 10 players on our board that we think are going to be really, really good NFL players. I won't, I may feel differently come next Thursday night if most of those, or if, only a couple of those players are off the board versus a whole lot of those players. But I think we really feel good about what we might be able to acquire right at 10.
Paul, you mentioned earlier about solving problems with a draft immediately is probably not a great idea. Have you found that it's harder to plug these guys in, to plug the play right away than maybe you thought back in 2016?
No, not necessarily. Not in terms of how I thought back then, because I think I had a similar feeling back then that it's just been confirmed now, or at least over time. Certainly my experience in baseball told the same story, right? That it does take a while for players to adjust, even at the highest level. Forget about the draft. I mean, even if you were to compare the draft to AAA baseball, it's still similar. It takes players a while once they get to the highest level to adjust to that level of play. I think the difference in the NFL is the expectation is that they're going to contribute right away, because they're on your team right away. You draft them in April and they're on your team in September. It is a way for teams to, quote unquote, fill holes, that they might have or feel like they have in the off season. But I think more than anything, it probably just sets unfair expectations for the player. If the assumption is that he's going to fill this big hole that you have on your team at any particular position, he's going to do it flawlessly right away. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. But like I said, probably not very different from what I anticipated, years ago.
Is that maybe giving up too soon on players sometimes?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, look, think about our game similar to the college game, right? There are very, very few true freshmen that just walk on the field and dominate. But there are more sophomores who are big contributors. And then there are a whole lot of juniors, and a lot of those guys declare, for the NFL draft, and then even more seniors. I think the NFL plays out pretty similarly. You've got first-year players. You have a few, who just step on the field and are ready to go and make a big contribution. But it's pretty rare, And then there's usually a pretty big jump between a player's first year and his second year. And I think we've seen that routinely. And yet there's usually even another jump, albeit maybe a smaller one, from their second year to the third year. And I do think you can sometimes run the risk of being disappointed in a player after his first year, maybe even after his second year, because it's taken a little while for him to get there. But, if in our minds we're thinking about them as freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we would probably think a little differently about them, or at least view them a little differently.
Paul, kind of along those lines, how would you just maybe explain your general draft philosophy on taking need versus taking best player available?
Yeah, I think we're, it would be consistent with what I've just been speaking about. I think we're probably more focused on best player available. Sometimes need will come into the equation, especially if you're trying to decide between a couple of players and you need a tiebreaker or something like that. But I think best player available is probably more of the driver.
Hey, Paul, the unusual circumstances of this draft and this virus has virtually eliminated the typical off-season camp season. Would that cause you to approach this draft differently in that rookies are going to have even tougher time than what you just said of breaking in? Would that alter your strategy just for 1 year only?
It's a great question. It's something we've talked a lot about internally. I don't know that it'll have a dramatic impact on what we do, just because I actually think our expectations for a rookie, even in a normal year, are pretty level set. That being said, the reality is such this year that they're just, the rookies aren't going to have as much time on the field as they normally would in a typical off season. So I think we should at least be aware of that. I will tell you, our coaches have done an unbelievable job of preparing for what's essentially a virtual, off-season program for our players. And I've been blown away with how they put together a plan to teach and to implement our philosophy and implement our culture and build our culture with our players. It's really been fantastic. Obviously led by Kevin, but each of our coaches, each one of our position coaches, it's really been remarkable what they've done, and has made me very bullish on our on our prospects, even without a normal off season.
Hey, Paul. Paul, obviously with like a lack of pro days and maybe being able to do some testing on guys that didn't work out at the combine or weren't at the combine, have you found other ways to kind of fill in some of those data points that maybe are missing?
We have, and we actually feel really good about it, to be honest. I mean, our scouts, I think, have done a terrific job of managing this situation, but it didn't start in March. It started for them back last year, and making sure that they had, great information, all through the fall, so that, once we got into even February draft meetings pre-combine, we felt like we had, 95% of what we needed. And then we did everything we could to clean that up, at the combine, and then even post-combine. Again, our coaches, some front office personnel, some other people have all participated in FaceTime calls that have been allowed to some of the prospects. And, in times that we've needed medical information, we've been able to get that. So while it's been a different process than we would normally undertake in the last, 6 weeks, our process was robust enough leading into this that it really didn't change that much for us at the end of the day. And I think we feel like we've got all the information that we need, and probably as much as just about as much as we would normally have.
Well, just a follow up on some of the OBJ stuff that was flying around yesterday when the rumor or the report came out. I think it was Colin Cowherd reported that Odell wants out of Cleveland. Is that inconsistent with what you know from Odell? And can you just address, the fact that I'm sure you know that he probably does want to be here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably leave that to Odell and Kevin to talk about, and I'm not going to, speculate on it. But I have no reason to believe that he doesn't want to be. I mean, Odell's been, I think he's been very good this offseason. He's been engaged. I know with Kevin, I think he's excited about the possibilities of what this offensive system could bring for him, and we're excited to have him.
Hey, Paul, just a
last one.
A record-keeping follow-up from January when we asked you about your contract situation. Is there any development on that?
Yeah, so Jimmy and I have discussed it. We were, discussing it sort of through the latter part of the winter, and I think we're in a great place on it. And then I'll be honest, with hiring the coach, hiring the GM, free agency, this coronavirus, and now the draft, it just hasn't seemed to be front burner material in terms of getting it done. But I'm wholly confident that we will probably shortly after the draft. But it really hasn't been a focus of late.